So the thing that's happened with stablecoins is going to happen with every other tokenized asset type. Stablecoins only became interesting to the government and only became interesting to society at large once enough of the underlying asset, the US Treasury, was in the stablecoin format. So once stablecoins passed 0.5% or 1% of total US Treasuries, then everyone started running around and caring about them and worrying about what is this format or what is this holder of US Treasuries. Firstly, that's going to happen with every other asset class and every other asset type. That once you get to 0.5%, 1%, 2%, 5%, depending on the asset class, everyone in that asset class will be like, whoa, what is this thing that is now eating up all of these underlying assets as it converts them into this tokenized form? So that's something you're going to see generally, and you're going to see more bills, more legislation, and more rulemaking from the regulators about those different asset types. But for stablecoins, it's now reached a high enough level where it's become a key issue. So they need to make regulatory clarity happen. They need to make legislative clarifications on how it should be used properly, because it's basically big enough. From here, as it becomes bigger, it will only be even more important that you have regulatory clarity about how to use it, because the US wants as many stablecoins as possible to be backed by the US dollar and US Treasuries. So if you actually accelerate the issuance of stablecoins, as the US government, you're accelerating distribution of the US dollar, which is adding and contributing to US dollar supremacy, US dollar reserve currency status, which is basically their main goal around here, which from their point of view is a very logical, very correct goal. So the stablecoin dynamic now has gone from some cottage industry thing that no one understands to big and important enough that we want more of it, because it has an impact on US dollar reserve currency status and US dollar supremacy and US dollar distribution, which is a very powerful positive thing. I personally think that once there's clear guidance on how stablecoins can be made, how they can be used, they'll become more and more ubiquitous as a form of payment. And as there's more and more value in stablecoins to buy digital assets, like tokenized funds, tokenized equities, tokenized commodities, tokenized real estate, tokenized whatever, that is very positive for the industry as a whole, because the stablecoin total user base and the stablecoin private keys and the stablecoin total amount out there in existence represents the total purchasing power for all the other assets that you would ever want to have bought from you in fiat currency. So if the total purchasing power and the total user base is a few million keys with a few 100 billion in purchasing power, that's one market into which you would issue a tokenized piece of real estate or a tokenized digital asset about funds or equities or commodities. However, if there's a few 100 million private keys with a few trillion in US dollars that can purchase those assets, that's a very different market. So we actually, as an industry, want as many people as possible to have stablecoins, and we want them to start spending them not just on cryptocurrency related things. We want them to start spending them on the types of financial products that we want more of in our industry, namely tokenized funds, tokenized commodities, tokenized equity, tokenized real estate, and other tokenized things. And so if you get to the next threshold of stablecoin adoption and ubiquity, you actually create, I think, a virtuous cycle where the market size, the purchasing power of everyone who has a stablecoin becomes large enough to push the digital asset issuance side of our market to create more good financial products, which then gives even more people a reason to get a stablecoin because they want to access those products. So that's the virtuous cycle that we all want to see, and that this legislation can massively help accelerate. So market structure seeks to solve the most long-standing question in our industry of whether a token is a security or a commodity, and under whose jurisdiction that token is regulated, namely the SEC versus the CFTC. This is a significant question because it determines the requirements that the token needs to meet. It determines the requirements that users need to meet for acquiring and holding and selling and moving and storing and paying taxes on and dealing with the token. So it's possibly the most significant question about tokens. And it has to be handled very carefully, and it has to be handled correctly in a way that it both protects, U.S. consumers but allows our industry to grow successfully in a way that you don't apply the wrong regulations to tokens in a way that slows them down or makes any kind of token or issuance made in the US system globally non-competitive. That's the risk that you run, is that you create a whole bunch of regulations on tokens, and then the tokens are never made in the US, and they're not available to people from the US, and people in the US can't buy them easily, and people in the US can't have them easily, and then the US misses out on the next generation of the global financial system, the Web3 version of the global financial system, both from an issuance point of view, a token usage point of view, and a whole bunch of other key things. It's kind of a key balance that has to work well enough that there isn't fraud or there isn't weird dynamics around tokens in a way that can harm consumers, but you also want to make it so that the US is the capital, the global capital, the global leader for token issuance, digital asset issuance, and all the token-related services and financial products around those, especially if you're assuming that a larger and larger percentage of the global financial system will be based on blockchain technology, Oracle network technology, smart contract technology, and the resulting tokenization of everything. So it's a very big question. It's underway now. It's what our industry has been waiting for. It's also going to have very big repercussions globally because the U.S. is known as what's called a super regulator. So because the U.S. is a super regulator, what the U.S. does is often copied by other regulators because they want their financial system to be compatible with the U.S. system so that they can transact easily between their two economies. So it's very important. It's underway now. There's a lot of people thinking about it. There's a lot of discussion. I've seen a lot of really smart people giving comments, giving feedback. We've given feedback to relevant folks. There's been a lot of deep thought on this topic here in DC, and I think people are very eager and actively making it happen, which is very good for our industry. Once this clarity appears, I think there'll be other bills about proof of reserves, bills about tokenization of digital assets like tokenized commodities, tokenized equities, tokenized real estate, all kinds of tokenized things. But the market structure bill creates this kind of foundation on which everything will be built, and so it's very important that it's done correctly. What the automation of compliance, including identity verification, will do is reduce the cost of transacting into the US system. So assuming that the US financial system is able to properly encourage the issuance of blockchain-based digital assets correctly, and that the US financial system houses the best blockchain-based digital assets on various topics like funds, equities, commodities, and other things like real estate, then one of the key factors will be the friction and the cost and the complexity of acquiring that asset, holding and managing that asset, and then reselling that asset when you've decided you want to, basically sell it and then have liquidity. If you automate away a lot of the compliance costs for acquiring, holding / managing, and reselling the asset, then that asset becomes much more attractive because you have to go through less cost and complexity to get it. It's cheaper and simpler for you to hold it and manage it for yourself or others. And when you want to resell it to get your cash back to buy other assets, you hopefully can do that very efficiently with a larger and larger group that has also automated their compliance, and you can be in the same liquidity pools, and you can have global access to capital rather than local, smaller domestic access to capital. So the automation of compliance really is a big unlock for the adoption and distribution, and therefore the demand for a digital asset. Without which, if you just take the old methods of compliance, many of which fundamentally don't work, as you can tell from all the fines and all the failures of compliance, and you just put them on top of blockchains, then you really won't create something that's as competitive as it could be. And there will be jurisdictions, and already are jurisdictions, that are starting to look at legal frameworks where the trustworthiness of a smart contract and the trustworthiness of an Oracle combined can automate away some of these compliance, identity, AML, KYC related costs and failure scenarios. And so those jurisdictions will then be much, much easier to enter. One way to think about it from a consumer point of view is it's like a user experience. So if the United States has a user experience where you have to click 55 buttons and you have to verify this and verify that and do this and do that, and it takes 2 weeks to gain access to something, and then when you want to gain something, access to the thing right next to it, you got to do it all again. Whereas another jurisdiction has a user experience of you verify yourself once, and that's it. You can access everything freely without re-verifying yourself for, let's say, a year. That's just a different user experience. You can think about it like apps. Like imagine if you had an app that took you 15 minutes to order an Uber, or you had an app that took you half a second to order an Uber. Obviously, you're going to be using the half a second app. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the end user experience that everyone in the financial system will have when they interact with a financial asset on a blockchain. And ideally, the US financial system's assets would have that half a second user experience, not the 15-minute user experience, because that does matter.